me, paleontology was a step deeper because the nature was here that you could observe, but then there was this whole ecosystem, this whole world that was so far in the distant past, something so ancient and foreign, just always really fascinated me. Hagerman was established as a monument to protect its paleontological resources and to provide a place for researchers to come and investigate the Pliocene. This is a site that has been monitored and excavated for close to 100 years, and yet we're still finding new species of animals. Not just finding new fossils, but new species that have never been known to science. So back in 1928, a rancher from Hagerman named Elmer Cook discovered a whole bunch of fossils eroding out of the bluffs near the Snake River in Hagerman. He reported this to a USGS geologist, who then brought it to the attention of Dr. James Gidley, who was a curator at the Smithsonian's National Museum of Natural History. In 1929 and 1930, Gidley led an expedition there to excavate what is now known as the Smithsonian Horse Quarry, and actually today this is a National Historic Landmark. When they started excavating, they actually found 3 fairly complete horse skeletons, and they shipped these along with several tons of matrix containing fossils from horses and other animals back to the Smithsonian, and they realized that it was worth mounting future expeditions there. One of the avenues of research here at Hagerman is trying to figure out just what happened to these horses. It's a question that we've been piecing together for almost a century, but we're just now really starting to apply modern technology to answer that question. To find a whole horse is unusual. To find 3 whole horses is unusual. And what we have here is over 200 horses that died over a very short period of time. So we have an entire herd structure that we're able to study. So we're looking at 2 of the famous horses from Hagerman. The fossils are really beautifully preserved. This is basically a skull and a lower jaw. They're pretty big. They're about the size of modern zebras, and their teeth are actually very worn. So horse teeth are usually quite tall, and these are worn down pretty far, which gives you a sense that they spent a lot of time chewing. Right now we are on the ground floor of the Natural History Museum on the National Mall, surrounded by a whole bunch of very cool fossils. As a paleontologist, it's really exciting to go out on an expedition to find fossils. But I think particularly for the paleontologists who were exploring at Hagerman, they actually found the first of several different species of mammals that had been totally unknown to science before. One is the holotype of the peccary or pig species called Platanus piercii. It's really the first fossil discovered of that species. Hagerman 4 million years ago was a very different place from what we see today. It was a lot warmer and wetter, so really different from that arid, open environment that you see here in South Central Idaho. So this is how many animals meet their fate at the hands or teeth of the predator. Various scavengers are going to come and grab pieces and drag it away. And
And so what was at one time a complete skeleton in one place can be now scattered over hundreds of feet. Fossils at Hagerman represent over 1 million years of history. And so if we want to really start looking at how the ecosystem evolved during that 1 million years, we need to be able to take those fossil localities and separate them in both space and in time. Luckily, we have volcanic ashes throughout the monument, and we have Laura, our geologist, who's going in and actually finding these ashes, dating them, and mapping them across the monument.
My research specifically helps to create the timeline for when the fossil critters were here. You cannot just go out in the field and pick up a fossil and directly date it. The only way that you can find out how old they are is by dating the rocks that they're in or the rocks that are above or below them. And that's what I'm doing here at Hagerman, is dating volcanic ashes that are interspersed between the layers that have fossils in them. Volcanic ash is the product of explosive volcanic eruption. So you have an explosive volcanic eruption that deposits volcanic ash on the ground, and then later other things are deposited, a critter comes along and dies and is buried rapidly, and then you have another volcanic eruption and deposits ash on top of those layers, and then we have kind of a volcanic ash sandwich of this fossil critter, and then we can date the top volcanic ash and the bottom volcanic ash and know the interval that that critter was alive. The terrain here is challenging because it's steep and you have to go up and down a lot often to get to areas. There's also almost no shade in the monument, so particularly during the summer, it gets really hot. So sometimes we have to get creative. We'll take kayaks and go out to the outcrops that are along the river because it would be too dangerous and too difficult to get to them from above. I really enjoy being out in the lake. It's dusty, it's dirty. Sometimes I come back looking like I rolled in a pile of dirt. Sometimes I come back looking like I rolled in a pile of dirt. I did, but fieldwork is why I got into geology in the first place, so it's what I like to do.
Laura and I have a really great partnership. Both of our work really complements each other, and I wouldn't be able to do my job effectively without the work that she does.
Collaboration is really important. It used to be that scientists would just kind of go out in their own little bubble, but here we're trying to create a more holistic story about everything that's going on here. If you have all the scientists coming out and doing their work together and talking to each other, then we can get a much better idea of the whole picture, the whole story of what it looked like here during the Pliocene. Let's do some digging. Ugly some digging. All right. know that that ash probably came from a nearby volcano. Whereas with the silicic ashes, those can travel hundreds of miles in the air. Finding the basaltic ash here can be really nice. It's a great marker when you go out and find one of those basaltic ashes and hit it with your hammer and get this kind of explosion of black. It's very exciting, and I have a much better idea of where I am in time in those rocks. The conditions here doing field work can be pretty tough, but I also pause and just sort of appreciate how cool this all looks. Sometimes there are wildflowers in the monument, or we'll see wildlife, and that's always a nice moment to pause and appreciate the way things look now instead of the way they may have looked several million years ago. Hagerman is a really diverse site. You have things from the size of small little field mice and voles up to mastodons and giant ground sloths. It's often some of those really small animals that can provide the most information about environments. A fossil is basically a replacement of the bone of an individual animal. This bone, which while it doesn't look it, is actually very porous, acts like a sponge and basically sucks up the water, soil, all the minerals that are in it, and that slowly replaces the bone and turns it into a fossil. And a fossil, which is now basically stone, can last the test of time. Even if a bone does become a fossil, the chances that it's actually going to be discovered by a scientist is still exceedingly rare. Fossils need to be exposed for us to even know that they're there. That's one of the reasons why we're able to find so many fossils at Hagerman. It's not necessarily that there's fossils here and not elsewhere in Idaho, it's that we have these very steep slopes that are constantly eroding away and exposing the fossils. After rains is always a good time to go out looking for fossils because it's a process that can actually help erode them out. And so what I'm doing today is just walking slowly around the slopes and looking for fossils that might be eroding out. Most of the fossils that we find here are just fragments of limb bones. Now, sometimes small fragments can provide information. I can tell you that this came from a mammal, and it was a larger mammal, so maybe even a horse, considering that this is at the horse quarry. Now, this here is something that we would consider diagnostic. A diagnostic fossil simply means it's something that has identifiable features. What we have here is a thoracic vertebrae or backbone of a horse. It's actually quite unusual to find what is basically a complete bone like this. You can see it's missing some of the bone right here, but to have this whole spine intact for 4 million years is really kind of an amazing thing.
When you find a fossil out in the field, it's been in the rock for usually millions of years. That's its protection. And so we make a plaster jacket out of burlap and plaster, and we wrap the whole fossil with a large chunk of its rock and bring the whole chunk of rock with the fossil in it back to the lab where then it's prepared out. You kind of feel like a time traveler. You open this jacket, these fossils have been in the rock for millions of years, and you're trapped back in time to see what they look like. A lot of times I'm the first person to ever see these fossils ever. You never know what's in those jackets. It may say And there probably will be a peccary in there, but there could be another animal in there too, so it's always a surprise and maybe it's something new, and so it's always Christmas. You want to go real slow, you don't want to hit the bone with your air scrap because the bone is usually softer than the rock, so if you can destroy the rock with your air scrap, you can destroy the bone with your air scrap. Making sure the bone remains undisturbed is the most important part of what I do.
And because they last, all good are best close to what life was long before we arrived on this planet.
The field of paleontology has been through massive changes in the past 100 years since the early Smithsonian excavations. Previously, it was all about finding a new species and describing it, giving it a name, and then putting it on the shelf for people to admire. Today, we still care about describing the species, but we're much more interested in understanding how that animal interacted with its environment. And so that really makes paleontology an interdisciplinary science that requires information and techniques and knowledge from different fields of science.
Another thing that has really changed is the tools that we use in paleontology. So we're not still using dynamite generally to blow up sites. In the 1934 expedition, the newer technology was to use horses and wagons as well as dynamite. We don't do that today. We try not to be quite so destructive.
It's only about finding the prettiest of fossils. There are fossil localities where there would literally be heaps of scientifically important fossils that were discarded because they weren't the most beautiful. Today, we realize that the ugliest, most broken, fragmented bit of fossil might contain really crucial scientific information.
I think we still have a lot of unknowns in our understanding of the past. The fossil record is pretty incomplete. The chances of something even becoming a fossil is really small. So there are probably critters that were alive that we have no idea about because we haven't found any of their remains yet.
The main reason I'm a paleontologist is because I like mysteries. So when we study the past and we find fossils, they're kind of a window that we can open to look through to peer back into time. It's like putting a puzzle together, but you never have all the pieces of the past. But every single time you add a new piece to the puzzle, you get more information and that picture gets clearer. It can be sobering and a little humbling to hold the fossil in your hand of an animal that was alive and walking and breathing 1 million years ago, 2 million years ago, 10 million years ago. And it gives me a sense of respect in a sense for all the life that came before me.
I think it's important to be curious about the world around you and think about what life used to be like when you weren't there.
Humans haven't really been around that long when you look at the whole evolutionary process, so we're relative newcomers to the scene, and it's interesting to see why we're here. How did we get here? I don't think we've even scratched the surface of what's out there to discover.
When I come out here and look at the monument, I know I probably think about it differently